Dave, welcome to the NTM Growth Marketing Podcast. It's an honor to be speaking with you today.
Thank you, Andrew. I'm happy to be here.
So we both went to Allegheny College, a few years apart when we graduated, and that's what initially drew us together through this conversation of me reaching out over
Mhm.
LinkedIn. And what really stood out to me in our first little chat a month or two ago was how you even got into marketing in the first place. Can you share that story as a college student of how you got into this world?
Yeah, sure. It's kind of a roundabout trip. I was a history and political science major as an undergraduate, so very
Hmm.
deeply focused on political theory. Very exciting stuff. Great parties, and um, and then from there went into the military. I actually spent 6 years on
Oh, I
active
didn't realize
duty.
that.
Yeah, I was 6 years in the U.S. Navy as an intelligence officer. And when I was done doing that, my wife and I had just moved down to Durham, North Carolina. She was faculty at Duke, and I was looking around for something to do, so I went to business school. And I'd always had a kind of an interest in startups and
Mhm.
the technology and that side of the business world. The idea of going and working in consumer packaged goods was not really my thing. Um, I didn't want to go to Wall Street, for better for worse. So I ended up taking a job at a startup, and I was hired in as director of operations for a startup, which needed that, but they didn't have anybody doing marketing. And so ultimately, I took that on as well and decided I kind of enjoyed that side of it. And so I'd certainly covered a lot of that in business school, but some of this is self-taught as well. And then the next job I got was to run communications for a different startup. And from that point on, I was like, okay, well, I'm kind of good at this. And from there, I went on to run all of marketing for a Swedish startup that was moving into the U.S. and run all of their North American operations. So it kind
Mhm.
of grew into the role and became, and added more and more onto it as I went.
So have you always been in B2B enterprise technology? And I say that's
Mhm.
because in my line of work, I've been in a lot of B2B in a different capacity. And I was watching this. Now, don't laugh when I give this example, but there's this marketer named Gary Vaynerchuk who I get a lot of
Mhm.
my self-taught education from. And he has this thing called Trash Talk, in which you go to garage sales, buy stuff and then flip it on eBay. And I've been watching it the last couple of days. I'm like, man, this seems like so much fun and so much different than my B2B world. Like maybe I want to explore some B2C stuff, but that was a tangent to ask, has B2B always been your world? And have you ever thought of B2C marketing opportunities?
Yeah, it's so short. So answer the first question first. Yes, I've always been on the B2B side, and it ends up being very different. They're different worlds because
Right.
in the B2C world, it tends to be much because you're selling to a consumer. It's entirely to an individual. Occasionally,
Mhm.
there's some group dynamics with family purchases and things like that. But for the most part, you're appealing to one single person to make a discretionary
Right.
purchase. And so the dollar values, they range, but they tend to not be, excessive. Probably a car or house is the most expensive thing an individual is going to purchase, and those are rare. You flip it over to the enterprise world,
Mhm.
where you're potentially dealing in, I've worked in companies where we've had seven and eight figure purchases. The sales cycle is 12 to 18 months long. You're dealing with a buying committee made up of different people
Mhm.
and different who, you ranging from, the actual end users, the people who are going to use the thing you're selling, all the way up to the CFO of the company who has to sign off on the deal. The CIO has to say, yes, that tech is going to fit with our stack. Security group has to say, yes, we are going to allow that thing to integrate with the rest of our systems. And then you have a bunch of people in between. Each of those folks has a say in whether this purchase is going to happen. They all have different motivations. However,
Mhm.
they're all still people and you have to appeal to them. But you have to wrap all of this stuff together into the same package. So it's a different kind of an exercise. A lot of the same techniques apply because ultimately you're still talking to people.
Right.
You still have to appeal to individuals. It's just in order to to get over the finish line with the actual sale, you have to be prepared to tell the same story from several different perspectives and emphasizing different values, and they have to come at the right time. So it's an interesting challenge.
Mhm.
I think B2C would be fun. I've never had that role. Um, and So I may end up there at some point, but for the time being, this seems to be a place where I can make a living. So this is where I stay.
What just dive a little bit deeper into that. What makes a good B2B marketer then? And how would that be different than a good B2C marketer? And I heard a commonality would be you're still talking to people at the end of the day, but it's still very different at the same time.
Yeah, I think it's how and where you engage. The channels tend to be different. I think that there's kind of a default view, and if you think of the pop culture, I mean, you mentioned Mad Men, for example. There's kind of this default view outside of our world that selling to consumers, it's fashion goods, it's individual products. You're talking about TV advertising, glossy creative advertising, a lot of creative activity, and then it's TikTok and Facebook ads. And on the B2B side, the stereotype is that it's very serious, it's very boring, it's very straightforward, and if it's online, it's LinkedIn, and and it's a relentless driven sales process. And there's truth in both of those stereotypes. However, the skills needed overlap a lot. So I'd say what makes a good B2B marketer? So I think first thing is you do have to understand your own company. I'll start there, which is a little bit of a surprise because usually you start with understanding the customer. We'll get to that. But you have to understand how your own company makes money. So if you're an enterprise software company, most likely your firm is rewarded in the market as a multiple of your annual recurring revenue, which means as a marketer, your job is to grow annual recurring revenue. If you are a financial services company, it's assets under management is what you're going to be evaluated on, and then also return on equity, return on investment capital. So there are different metrics which require different behaviors from marketing and different activities engagement with the market. You need to understand what those are so that you're spending your effort on the right thing. So there's that piece of it first. You also have to understand how the rest of your company is motivated. If your sales team is selling a portfolio of products, they have a number. Each sales rep has a quota. Is there quota on each? Is it evenly distributed across the portfolio? Is it just we don't care how you get to 2 million a year, but just get there? Their behavior is going to be different. They're going to go the easiest path to make their number because they're people who do what people do, and they respond to the incentives they're given. If you're responsible for promoting products that the sales team is not incented to sell, you're going to have a real problem. You have to change that. And you have to put your effort into making that change, or no matter how good your campaign is, it's never going to help. So you have to understand how the rest of your company is incented to act. And so that really understanding how does our company work is a really important part of B2B success. Second piece, and this is where everybody comes back to, is you have to understand your customer. So we have a technology, we have a widget, we have a thing we make, and we think customers that like this ought to want them because it should help them. Okay, well, that's great. How? What are their motivations? What do they get paid for? What do they get rewarded in the at the macro level? How are your customers rewarded in the market? And how does our solution help them to achieve those objectives? Then you break it down to those 20 people in the buying decision that we talked about a little earlier. Each of them has their own set of motivations. So if you're selling, say, for example, a price optimization solution that sells to manufacturers. All right, so the pricing analysts, they have their interest. They want to do their job more efficiently. They don't want to have to work all weekend when it's time to do their monthly or quarterly reports or anything like that. They want to be able to do their job more efficiently. And your solution comes along and says, hey, look, we help you take stuff that was done in spreadsheets and move it in an automated form. It'll be more efficient. It's less work. You don't have to fight with pivot tables all weekend in order to get your stuff done. You can spend time with your family and still make your bonus. Wonderful. Great. That's one element of value. The guy who owns the P&L for that business unit is looking at the same thing and says, as a result of automating pricing, I now have the ability to react to market changes in commodity prices, which last year was a really big deal. And I can adjust my prices to maintain profitability, even though the price of copper has tripled in the last 2 weeks. That means my company will maintain profitability. My business unit is going to hit its targets for margin, and I'm going to make my bonus and get promoted. That's a different set of motivations than my analysts. And then the CEO looks at that and says, well, if we can do this here, I can apply that across the entire business, which means I can expand the profitability of the company. and and on and on and on. So each of these folks has a somewhat different set of motivations. They're all they're all as a result of value that your solution creates. But you have to talk to the right people about the right thing. And so you have to structure the message and the engagement and the communications in such a way that you're telling the right message to the right people at the right time in the sales cycle.
So,
And then and then I had one more thing on this.
sure.
Yeah, which is understanding your craft. Marketing is a lot of different jobs. It's a lot of different skills. It's a very different skill set to be able to recognize what's going to be a PR pitch that's going to resonate with the Wall Street Journal and get our name in there and elevate the position of our company. That's very different from being able to figure out how to implement Marketo on top of Salesforce in a way that is going to give us the insights to automate our customer communication process. There's a lot to learn, a lot of different functions, and you can make a really good living being great at one of them. If you want to move into a leadership position, you have to understand how they all work and how they all fit together.
When I was at Allegheny, there was a professor, his name is Chris Allison. I'm not sure if he was at Allegheny the same time as you or not. He might have been a little older. But when we were speaking in some of our entrepreneurship classes, he was talking about how do you get the attention of businesses, and he simplified it to either make them money, save them money, or save them time. Is B2B marketing as simple as those three things, or are there other things involved, like you were just elaborating on, to pay attention to?
So ultimately those are the things that are going to make it happen. But I think there's an emotional component. This is where there's an overlap with B2C here that people on my side of the house, the B2B side of the house, tend to shy away from, which is the emotional component of it.
Can I interject and ask a question on that? So when I'm hearing you say that, and if you're on video, you can see this. So I just bought this Garmin running watch because I'm going to be running some races, like I think we talked about when we chatted in December. And this also, it's going to do the job, but it's also communicating the world. I wear Garmin, which means I'm a good runner in a lot of ways. Is that, do B2B, and maybe that's you're about to dive into in the emotional side, is there that communication in the world of I buy this, I use this in that process?
Well, there's some elements of that. So, and I am actually wearing a Garmin watch as well, but I am not going to claim to be a good runner. But I like to feel like I am. So there's part of that. That's some of it. I think, certainly there's a brand affiliation. If you say, hey, you know what, we're the kind of guys who, we're the kind of company, and I'm the kind of guy who brings in the Oracle team, and I work with them, and, they're expensive, but, I'm playing in the big leagues, or, and I just pulled that out of the air. I don't feel that strongly about Oracle, but as an example, there's a little bit of that. I think more of it is as much we are taking a technical solution to a common problem, which says, how do we look at ourselves as a company? How do we look at ourselves as a department? Well, we're the kind of folks who are using cutting edge technology to do our jobs. And we all sit up a little straighter when we feel that way, and we feel a little bit more like we're leaning into the job a little bit, and maybe it's even a little more fun. And so that's part of that emotional piece. There are a lot of ways you can play it out. Sometimes it's a matter of saying, well, I want to do business with a company that I feel good about. I feel good about their values. And so some people will say, I don't want to name names, but say if you have a company who frankly you think is unethical, and say, I don't want to work with them. And so a lot of times you'll see companies posturing about how ethical they are in order to appeal in that way. And it can be tough. You have to make sure that it's real. It has to be genuine in order for that sort of an approach to work long time. But I think that component of it, of recognizing that ultimately they are people who are using your solution, and they're people who are engaging with with your solutions and with your brand. They value how they feel as a result of that, and that is part of the buying equation, and that's part of the decision to continue to work with you as you go forward.
When you were giving a previous answer, you talked about buying cycles. Can you talk about the importance of understanding that? And I'll even give an example of our agency. One of our clients thought her buying cycle was 3 weeks. In actuality, when we dove deeper into her analytics, it was actually 6 months. So she was upset that sales weren't there in 3 weeks, when actuality, it's another 5 months until it's going to kick in for her.
Yeah, so figuring out what your buying cycle, what your sales cycle time actually is, in and of itself, is a big point of argument. So there's certainly research out there that says that, as more and more of the customer research goes online, and the company actually has less and less to do with it, the sales cycle actually started several months before you ever engaged with anybody.
Mm-hmm.
And they're doing their research. They're researching solutions. They're visiting your website. So if you've got good signal intent data, you can actually see some of this coming. But that's a relatively new feature. They're doing their research, and by the time they raise their hand to say, "I want to talk to somebody about this," they may have already made they may have already gotten to their top three. And then from there, you still have to go through the evaluation process. And you still have to go through their own internal processes for buying and their own internal processes for evaluation. One of the challenges that a lot of sales teams have is that they assume that companies who are doing the buying committees actually know what they're doing. And a lot of times they don't. If you've ever, you talk to folks who brought in on the buying decision on a piece of enterprise software, and I've been on these committees a couple of times, and there's a lot of, okay, we were told to evaluate this tool and decide, make a recommendation, and then buy it and implement it. And you find out that your company has all sorts of processes for making major purchases that you never knew existed, and they don't really advertise. And that tends to stretch things out even further. So there's an awful lot that goes into what constitutes the buying cycle. Mm-hmm. And it's almost always longer than people think it is.
Got it. At your experience at some of these large organizations, like you had mentioned, the CFO and then their sales teams, what advice do you have as a marketer to work cross-departmentally with all these different individuals, and they have different incentives than you do as a marketer?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I would say make friends with your sales leadership, which is, sometimes that's a very contentious relationship, but I think salespeople are thrilled that anybody wants to help.
Why is it contentious?
It just is. I've seen this in a lot of companies where the sales and the marketing people just don't mix. They're speaking different languages, they're different expectations. And it's unfortunate because you're supposed to be playing for the same team. But sometimes it happens. But I would say seek out your experienced salespeople. There's usually, there's the guy who just got promoted from BDR, or for business development rep or sales development rep, and suddenly as an account rep, he doesn't know anything. He's energetic and smart and learns really well, or he wouldn't have been promoted that way. You seek out the guys who've been in the business for 20 years. They've been through these cycles. They've made some of those mistakes, and ask them pointed questions about the individual personas. Now, your product marketing team should be doing this anyway. Of basically understanding the different buyer personas, the motivations, and say, okay, well, when there is an end user for our solution, what do they care about? What do they do? How do they interact? Where's value created for those people? What is a CIO or the representative of the IT department at whatever level we're going to engage? What are their motivations? What else are they dealing with? And part of that is understanding that, I know when I was in hospital IT and healthcare IT, the typical hospital system CIO is responsible for supporting something on the order of 300 different enterprise applications as keeping the hospital running. And so, sales team comes in, marketing team comes in with, hey, we've got this new thing you guys ought to buy. And we don't understand why they don't want to act on it right away. And so part of that motivation is like, well, the CIO would like to reduce the number of vendors he deals with. The finance department also wants to reduce the number of contracts they have to review. They don't want to bring another vendor in that they have to validate, all these sorts of things.
Mhm.
None of these have anything to do with how well your solution does whatever it is you say it does. That never enters the equation. It's just, this is the macro world that these guys work in. You have to respect that, and you have to be able to figure how you fit into that world. A lot of times that's something that experienced sales reps learn on their own. And then the guys who are really good just kind of do it, but they don't tell anybody else. It's much more effective if you can incorporate that into your marketing message. And then a lot of that will be dealt with automatically as a result of communicating the right things at the right time. But you've got to reach out and be willing to ask the questions, be willing to learn from people in order to make that happen.
I'm going to combine two questions on my mind into one. It will
Okay.
make sense. So, and it's playing on the how do you work well with different departments. So say you're a marketer, you've been doing some self-taught education, and maybe it's not applicable to B2B enterprise software, but you're looking at all the data on TikTok and you're going, we're really missing the boat here. Look at all of our competitors building community over here, their views. We really need to get into here. And in this process to convince your company, you need to convince the CFO that this is going to be a good investment of marketing dollars. What advice would you give to that marketing professional to be able to enroll their company to invest in new marketing mediums that are arising they want to be early adopters on?
Great question. How do you do that? Because there's so many channels out there.
Right.
I would say that in the specific example that you've provided, I would say you talk to your CMO and you say,
Oh,
you know
so
what?
don't actually go to the CMO or CFO,
No,
go to CMO.
no, for God's sake, don't ask those guys for opinions on individual channels. No, that's a CMO discussion. Just say, look, I see this stuff out here, and here's an experiment I want to run. Here's how I have a hypothesis based on the data that we see here. And I believe that we could be effective in building community among our end users by doing a TikTok channel.
Mm-hmm.
And then you got to figure out, okay, well, how would we do that in a way that would actually engage the people we want without turning them off and all that sort of thing? And I think in this particular case, you hire a creative agency to do that, because none of us are really that. It's hire people who are good at that to do that type of thing. As with any creative, I would just like, please outsource this. Don't try to be funny on your own. It doesn't end well. But that's something where you say, well, what you hope that your CMO has done is created an environment that encourages experimentation. Mm-hmm. And so come to them with an experiment of just like, I see an opportunity here. I think but not just, you can't, if you show up and say, hey, it'd be really cool if we were on TikTok, that nobody cares.
Right.
But if you come to them and say, we have an opportunity to engage with our end user base in a way that is going to promote positive associations with our brand, and also gives us an opportunity to teach some of our end users about additional capabilities of our solution, we have an opportunity to improve our net promoter score and also potentially expand our license footprint. At that point, you have my attention. And then you can build an experiment to test that theory to see if you can actually do it. And if it works, you can expand it. And at that point, you go to the CFO to ask for more money.
So what I'm hearing then is it's create some type of pilot. I'm just going to make this up. 3 months, $10,000 of marketing budget. It's a clear end to this. If it's not working, create very tangible qualitative goals that you can strive towards. And then ideally it does well, and your CFO will allocate more money to keep on expanding.
Well, and yes, and it needs to be something that, I mean, one of the biggest challenges I think that a lot of marketing teams have is understanding what exactly does success look like.
That was going to be my next question. So I'd love to hear.
Yeah. Okay. Well, and it depends. It depends on the company. I've worked in, when you work in a startup, especially very early stage, everything is about how do we get the first customer? Hopefully they're not spending a lot on marketing at that point. How do we get to customer number 10? How do we get to customer number 50? And a lot of those are going to be very hands-on, individual, all hands on deck kind of efforts to get there, because you haven't quite, but at some point you get to product market fit. Then you have to get to go to market fit of saying, all right, well, we've figured out our product solves a problem that's repeatable and we can deploy the product repeatably. Now we have to figure out how to talk about that problem and talk about and engage with customers to be able to to earn the opportunity to sell the product to them and move on from there. In those cases, your marketing's focus is very strongly on identification of opportunities.
Mhm.
And so things that are good at engaging community and building user enthusiasm, although those are noble goals, those are not going to help you get the 50th customer. Those are going to help you get the renewal 2 years down the road, which is good, but that's probably not your most important priority right now. So you're less likely to get approval to go forward with something like that. Now, if you're looking at it and saying, you know what, we're going to do this thing that's going to be funny and it's going to raise our profile and as a result, people in our space are going to know who we are and they're going to call us because they think we might be fun to work with. That's powerful, and that can work. It's hard to execute. So it's more a matter of being very clear with your, as a marketing leader, being very clear with your team about what the objectives are. And the marketing leadership needs to be very clear with their own C-suite, and again, in a smaller company, usually the head of sales is also the founder, or else the founder is head of engineering, but it's somebody who's early on, making sure that those folks are on board with the way you're putting your effort and where you're prioritizing. And then as you move into larger organizations, then where you've got a large installed base and a lot of your revenue is coming from renewals rather than from net new or from license, from footprint expansions, then improving that engagement with the end user, which again does improve your net promoter score, which helps drive the renewal cycle. That becomes much more important, and those types of things can be more valuable in that case.
Initially, I was going to ask this question just around one area of management, but I want to hear your opinion on two. So what advice do you have for that marketing professional of managing marketing talent? And I'm asking this because you just gave the example of the creative agency and also managing marketing vendors that are supporting you with very niche elements. As in my experience, managing both, it's similar but different. But love to hear from you, your advice of managing employee and marketing vendors.
Yeah, I think so. First off, in all cases, for whether they're your direct employees or whether you're your agency vendor augmentations, it's clarity and expectations. And as much, there's an old quote that stresses what happens when you don't know what you're doing. And I think people want to know what they're supposed to do all day. And when you don't know, people are anxious. They don't work well because they're not sure if they're working on the right things. So clarity in terms of what is it we're supposed to do. This comes back around to, well, how is our company going to be evaluated? How is our company, what does success for our company look like? And then how does marketing's efforts contribute to that success? When you have clarity on that, everybody understands it. Everybody can answer that question the same way. Like, okay, then you can look at individual tasks or individual opportunities and say, well, does this support that goal? And it makes it easier to decide what to do. It also makes it easier to think about how you execute things. How well do we support the goal of the task at hand? Then for each person, for directs, you look at, well, what role are they in? And then what are the skill sets that they need in order to be successful in this role? You build out a matrix, you evaluate them, you work with them. What are you good at? What are you less good at? Where do you need to improve? And then part of that needs to be, again, for the individual, not just your job right now, but where do you want to be in 2 years? Where do you want to be in 10 years? What do we have to do to give you the skill set that's going to allow you to not just do your job today well, but what's going to allow you to grow into the role you want to have as you move forward in your career? Now, agencies are a little different because you're not worried about career development for your agency.
Right.
Although, it's great if they have it, but that's not your problem. But in those cases, it's probably even more important to be clear about expectations and what is it we need. And so if you are, I've seen this before where companies will hire a PR firm because it says in the playbook that you're supposed to have a PR firm.
Right.
Okay. And they go out and they pitch a bunch of articles and they do lots of activity. And then after 8 months or so, you say, well, what are we getting out of this? And nobody has a good answer, and you end the engagement and nobody's happy. If it's instead, you can be very clear that we are trying to position our customer as one of the top three choices for this particular business problem. And so
Mhm.
anytime there's a discussion of this business problem, we need to be quoted. We need to be included. At the very least, when they do when they write the article and they say other vendors in the space include blah, 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 you've got to be at one of those. That gives your PR firm very clear guidance about what's expected. And it gives you a very cut and dried, we're either in there or we're not. And if we're not, why not? What are you doing about it? And you recognize it's not going to happen in everything. It's not precise, but they know what's expected. They know what success looks like. They know how they're going to be rewarded. That makes operating a lot easier. And then, and that's one example I'd say for, if you've got somebody who's building creative for you, then you need to make sure, you need to be clear about what the position needs to be right.
Mhm.
What is it what do we stand for? How do we talk about ourselves? What do we not do? And make sure that those things are clear. It's a lot easier for the agency to operate if you have clear directive. It's the old, if you write a good brief, the ads will be better. Um, so that piece of it is the same.
Let me ask you this. How do you align agency incentives with the business incentives? And so I say that because the agency is, outside, they probably are managing, that specific team, maybe half a dozen clients, you're one of half a dozen. So if you say, I need this today, they're not an employee, they don't have to turn it around. They might be like, all right, well, we'll get this to you by end of week. And maybe there can be that contention of like, you're charging high retainers. And then at the same time, the agency might feel like we're just on the edge of getting fired after our contracts. Like, how can you harmonize these two parties to create a relationship that works and is not contentious?
Yeah, boy, great question. And it's hard.
Mhm.
So I think as much as possible, you want to try to be a good client, which means not dropping, oh, by the way, I need a complete rewrite um or complete redesign of our company deck in 6 hours because the CEO is going to go live with it, and we need to blow. Oh, sorry, I forgot to mention that. So we need you to do that right now. And I know it's 6 o'clock at night already, but we need it. That happens occasionally. You try not to do that. You try to telegraph as much as possible, be clear about your expectations as much as possible. You try to,
Mhm.
some of it's as much as possible. You want to extend the same courtesy to your agency partners as you do to your own employees.
Mhm.
Um, it's easy to say that. Sometimes these things come up. And I think some of it is just, can you bank enough goodwill in your day-to-day operations that when the fire drills occur, you get a good response and people feel obliged and actually want to help you.
Uh, to interject right there, that was
Yeah.
a lesson I learned from a mentor in managing vendor relationships of treating them
Mhm.
nicely without goodwill. Because if you've been a jerk to them, not paying your bills on time, you're like
Mhm.
always asking for discounts, and you're in that bind, and you're like, I need this. The vendor is going to be like, oh, sorry, I just saw your email. It's Thursday, or whatever
Oops.
thing it could be. Like, oops.
You were clearly gonna fire us anyway, and we were thinking of firing you. So yeah, it's yeah, don't be that customer that they want to fire.
Mhm.
Because some vendors will,
Right.
you know,
Fire
some
the.
some some will fire the customer if they're too much of a pain.
Mhm.
So yeah, it's a challenge. I mean, fire drills happen, and
Mhm.
there's at some level you try to mitigate them, you try to head them off, you try not to create them.
Mhm.
Sometimes they happen anyway, and so you want to make with your internal and your external
Mhm.
resources, you want to make sure that you have the rest of working with you makes it worthwhile.
Mhm.
Because your internal resources, there are plenty of jobs out there. Even the last month notwithstanding, there still are
Mhm.
plenty of jobs out there. People don't have to put up with it.
Mhm. I'd love to hear from you about a marketing failure experience. And I say this in a lighthearted way and not trying to create any shame. And I say this too because of you said it just for a second, you're on experimentation. And as marketers, there needs to be some degree of experimentation with what you're doing. And I say that in comparing this to like, if you need shoulder surgery, like I don't want my doctor to be running a split test on my shoulder surgery. Like go in there and fix it. You have one shot. But as marketers, we have some more leeway to have that experimentation and failure in our tests.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And one of the things I try to encourage in my teams, I want to encourage experimentation. Um, Try something new and then try to figure out, not just, okay, we're going to try some stuff and some of it's not going to work. We're going to try things. We're going to do our best to mold the experience in a way that's going to be positive for the company and to make sure that we're still going to go into it with a hypothesis of what we think we're going to get out of it and how we're going to achieve that. Sometimes it doesn't work. As far as like the biggest marketing fail, I once presented an entire webcast with my microphone on mute, and I don't recommend that. That was many years ago, and I won't say which company I was with, but I'll put that out as the biggest. Oh my God, really? I just did that. That I've experienced. But that said, there are lots of things where, I mean, I think the whole process of A/B testing is a series of failures, a series of planned experiments where some of them are going to not work, and then you need to systematically eliminate the things that don't work, and then double down on the things that do. So that's just part of the game.
So this is a question I like to ask people, and in my opinion, it's probably even more pressing in the last 30 days because of Chat GPT and how everyone's talking about this. And I haven't even wrapped my head around how AI is going to impact marketing moving forward. But how do you think marketing is going to evolve in the ensuing years, and whether that's new social media platforms, new tech, AI, Chat GPT? Like, what do you think it's going to happen the next couple of years in marketing?
Oh, great. So the prediction question is awesome, because if I can make a bold prediction here, and if I'm right, I'm a genius. And if I'm wrong, nobody's going to remember. So
exactly.
So let's see. So you bring up Chat GPT. So what do we got there? So what I see right away is there's going to be a lot of really bad to mediocre content produced.
Because they're using Chat GPT to.
Well, it just makes it easier to write bad content more quickly. And so there are some organizations that are saying, oh, we're going, I think BuzzFeed had said, oh yeah,
I saw that.
Yeah. They had an announcement about it. It's like, well, I wasn't reading their articles before, but now I really won't read their articles. So if your job is to churn out crap, this makes it easier and cheaper to churn out crap. Okay. Well, that's hardly a ringing endorsement. Now, what is it good for? And the things that I've seen so far, and I've played with it a little bit, and I haven't really put a whole lot of serious effort into it. But I think there are things that it is good for. So, for example, I saw a post recently where somebody said, "Well, I wrote blog posts, and then I asked it to create titles, and it came up with more creative titles than what I had come up with on my own." So, in terms of generating a whole bunch of stuff, it's really good for that. So, there are places in the marketing process.
We've used it for headline creation, and it's good for that idea stimulation.
Yeah, exactly. So I think right now we're at that stage where those things like that on the margins, there's some value there. I actually I've heard suggestions of, we'll have it write your first draft for you. It's like, no, because the first draft can be just fundamentally wrong, and then you're stuck in a long framework, and it doesn't help you think through the idea. So I don't like that approach. Regardless, there's going to be a lot of experimentation. I think there's going to be a period of real junk, and then I think if you go through the hype cycle, and then you finally end up on the plateau of productivity, or whatever it is they call that, where people figure out what actually works with this thing. We'll see some improvements, and I think some of them will be good. So there's that. Some other areas, on the MarTech side. So B2B, that we live for our MarTech stacks. I think you're going to see continued consolidation around Salesforce. I think HubSpot is going to capture some of the CRM business away from Salesforce, and as they bring more capabilities in, and there's probably room for some upstarts in that space as well to create their own ecosystems as newer approaches to marketing, to go to market, evolve. So I think we'll see some movement there. Email marketing won't die; it'll just get worse. I'll just leave it at that. And let's see, I had a couple other things. Let's see, I think there's a chance we're going to see a resurgence of Bing as a search engine platform that people actually care about. And I think that's a combination of whether if they can do a good job of bringing Chat GPT into it, I know they're going to throw a lot of money at it, but that doesn't necessarily mean it'll work. But
Right.
there's possibility there. And then Google's got its own antitrust issues. And frankly, it's hard to find the actual search results on the Google page anymore. There's so many ads there. So it becomes less and less useful that way. So I think
Mhm.
people may be open to looking at alternatives. So Bing has a chance there. And I think there's room. There may be space for a new competitor to try to take some of that share away. We'll see what happens. It's a tough sell, but it may be there. And then last thing on the marketing side, I would say is that I hope we're going to continue to move away from gated content. Um, I think we spend way too much time trying to get people to give us their email address and just assume that, our white paper is somehow worth your being badgered by us. And most of them aren't. I've written some of them. They're not all that good. Some are great. Some are great. Most are not. But I think as we move more to an open exchange model as we engage with our prospects, I think we'll see it's better for everybody involved.
And the last question today is, what is the best purchase you've made for under $100, personally or professionally in the last 6 months, and why?
Yeah, personal purchase under $100, new windshield wipers.
Awesome.
And you laugh and say, really? Okay, try it. Trust me, it's a huge improvement on your driving. And it's one of those. It's like, well, wow, I should have done this before. It's not hard, and they'll install them for you. And it's like, oh, I can actually see out the window when it's raining. This is really nice, and actually has a noticeable impact on the quality of your day when you're using them. So that's my short answer.
Awesome, Dave. Thank you so
All right,
much for your time today. It was
Andrew,
greatly
I appreciate it.
appreciated.
All right, this has been a lot of fun. Thank you.